Assalamu alaikum. Hello and good afternoon. You're listening to Atiyah on the Mental Health Show, Mental Health and Emotional Wellbeing Show on Iman 1, Radio Iman 1, and you can catch us on DAB. In this show, we hope to provide information that may be helpful to support your well-being and the well-being of others, because everyone's mental health matters. We're not here to offer you any advice in place of your clinician. However, we will share information that may encourage you to seek support. If you feel you need to discuss your health and well-being following the show, then please contact your GP or mental health professional. You're very welcome to send in comments with regards to the show. Today we have a special guest with us, alhamdulillah, and we have Maryam Javaid, who is a keynote speaker and a cultural educator. She's a parent mentor working at the intersection of race, culture, and generational healing. She is the founder of Black and Brown Parenting, a platform for Black and Brown parents, where she teaches conscious parenting, breaking generational cycles, navigating cultural taboos, and creating emotional safe homes. She has appeared on BBC, ITV News, and is a regular guest on the Islam Channel. And her writing has been featured in the Daily Mirror in other mainstream publications. Through her work, she helps women and families heal inherited wounds, show up unapologetically, and build homes and communities where survival is no longer mistaken for wellness. And thank you very much, Jazakallah khair, for joining us, Maryam. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, and Ramadan Mubarak to everyone that's listening. Thank you so much for having me on today.
It's a pleasure, and Ramadan Mubarak to you also. Before we start, I'd like to know a bit about Maryam, if that's okay. What's brought you into this field? What's interested you in this work? And I know that we're focusing on boundaries in Ramadan in particular, but I am interested in, and I'm sure some of our listeners will be interested in, what's brought you to this field of work.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm a mum of 3, alhamdulillah. I have 3 girls, and I have an academic background in South Asian and African colonial history. And I remember there was a point in my motherhood journey where I got to the point where I thought, sometimes love isn't enough. And because I had studied the history of our communities, I started to understand why we parent a certain way or why we have particular cultural norms in our communities. And I thought, I can't be the only one struggling with this. And from there, that's when I certified as a parent mentor, and I started to speak and just share some of my reflections and things that were going on for me. And I found that I wasn't the only one struggling with it. But to everybody that's listening, I think the one thing that I did find is that our stories and our realities as either Black or brown women wasn't part of the conversation. So I didn't see anything on social media. I didn't see anything in the books. I didn't see anything in the podcast. And I thought, well, if I can't see what we all need, then sometimes you have to be the one to create it. And that's how Black and Brown Parenting and the work that I do initially started.
Fantastic. Jazakallah khair. So you've talked there a bit about your personal experience and what's led you to start this work, and being kind of an area where there's not much interest, or you've seen any areas that you can support yourself or see yourself in. It sounds very interesting, and I believe that you have an Instagram page and other social media that you can tell us about later, so that people can, inshallah, follow you and find out more about kind of your area of work. In today's radio show, we were thinking about Ramadan boundaries. We're thinking about parenting during Ramadan. As busy mums, it's quite difficult to kind of juggle everything. It can initiate a lot of stress. And I was thinking that we could start the mental health and emotional well-being with this focus. How do we, or mothers who are kind of high-achieving working mums, how do they kind of find that balance? And what would you say the pressures are of Ramadan? Let's think about kind of responsibilities and what kind of impact that has on mothers.
Yeah, I think motherhood in general, we obviously have a lot of responsibility, especially if you're working and raising the kids at the same time, and, household responsibilities and maybe even wider extended family responsibilities. I know that within, the cultural aspects that we live in, there is definitely that as well. So
Mhm.
I guess a lot of the struggles that we face as mums is, parenting doesn't stop during Ramadan. We still have to, deal with the sibling squabbles. We still have to deal with the teenagers who are, hormonal. We still have to deal with the household chores and responsibilities. And I think, unfortunately, you see this very predominantly in Ramadan, that a lot of it falls on women predominantly in
Mm.
the household. And something that I always say, that I don't like to use the word balance, because I don't think balance can really ever be truly achieved, because everything has its time and its place. And
Mhm.
sometimes something might take more priority for you, and something you may have to, leave for later. So one thing, and I know that across my social media, I talk about this quite a lot. I talk about how important it is for women, for mothers to have boundaries. Because if we think about the Ramadan and what it's about, obviously it's about consciousness and obviously drawing closer to Allah. Unfortunately, what I have found, and I think a lot of the listeners who are listening may also have found, is that the emphasis of Ramadan, unfortunately, has become food. And the making or the serving of that food is always down to the women who are juggling, working, who are juggling kids, who are juggling. So one of the major things that I say that is, as a woman, it's an absolute non-negotiable that you start to think about drawing boundaries for yourself. Because whilst Ramadan is for your husband, it is for, your wider family, it's for your children, it also is very much for yourself as well. And sometimes it can be very difficult to set those boundaries within our homes when so much of the burden, and I am going to use the word burden, is placed on women, because there are familial expectations, there are a lot of cultural expectations, and unfortunately, women get to a place where they have to sacrifice their ibadah, they have to sacrifice their mental health, they have to sacrifice their physical health to serve everyone else. And I don't know about you and everybody else that's listening. I am pretty sure that Allah did not make Ramadan like that for women. And unfortunately, it is the cultural kind of familial systems that we live in that makes that experience for women, particularly of Ramadan, which absolutely breaks my heart. And I encourage every single woman out there to start thinking about, what does Ramadan look like for you, instead of what does it look like for the kids and what does it look like for the husband. And as I say this, I just want to give a quick disclaimer, because I get this quite a lot. And while serving is beautiful, Allahumma barik. You get so much. Serving is also ibadah, right? Cooking for your family is ibadah, absolutely. Raising your kids during and outside of Ramadan is absolutely ibadah. But at the same time, there is also ibadah for yourself. And I encourage and invite every single woman out there, and it's a reminder to myself, to start thinking about, what does my personal ibadah look like? Because your ibadah isn't just in serving other people.
Yeah, very interesting. And you're right. Ramadan is for everyone. That's what I'm taking from what you're saying there. And finding kind of a way in our path can be quite difficult, can't it, for women,
Yeah.
for sisters. And I'm just wondering, can you provide us some tips around kind of experiences that others have probably shared, they found difficult, how they found their way around it? Unless you'd like me to give you some examples around that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm mindful when what I'm about to share, because I know that in motherhood, I always say that we have seasons. So for those of you who have younger children, your Ramadan is going to look very different. For those of you who have a mixed age of children, it's going to look different. For those of you who have teenagers, it's going to look very different. So for example, I always advise all of the women that I speak to, is I know that for some of us, we're on day 2 or day 3 of Ramadan now, but it's not too late. It's not too late to have a conversation as a family. It's not too late to talk about, right, who's going to be helping out in this particular iftar, or who's going to go do the shopping for the ingredients, or who's going to, cook iftar on this particular day. It's really, really important. And this is the number one thing that I'm going to say is that you delegate. You delegate to your husband, you delegate to, your in-laws or whoever it is that's in your family. You delegate to the kids if they're old enough. And that's something that I do. So if I give you an example, just yesterday, it was my two older girls that actually made the majority of the iftar. And that's absolutely okay. And it's really important that we encourage children and just people in our family to take responsibility, because as much as there is so much reward in, cooking iftar, it's also for other people as well as it is for you. So that's the first tip that I would definitely give. Secondly, I would say to every single woman out there is, what does your ibadah look like? So for example, have you set any goals for Ramadan? And I'm very intentional when I say this. It doesn't have to be, when you're working and you're coming home from work, it might not necessarily be, oh my gosh, I'm going to finish the Quran, because that might not be something that is doable in your unique circumstances. However, it might be, okay, I'm going to make sure, come what may, I'm going to make sure that I read one page of Quran and I read some of the tafsir, for example. Or it might be that I'm going to follow this particular YouTube series this Ramadan. Or it might be that, I am going to, let's say, for example, I am going to read this particular book during Ramadan. So for every single woman out there, create some goals. They don't have to be huge. They have to be realistic to what your life is like and what you have going on, the ages of your children, etc., etc. Even if it's 10, 15 minutes. And I say this is so, so healthy. So for those of you who have children, the mothers especially I'm speaking to now, it's so healthy for children to see that mummy has her own ibadah, that mummy isn't just, cooking and cleaning, and whilst she enjoys doing that, or whilst that's very, very important, ibadah also looks like, worshipping Allah in other ways. And something that I just want to say to women, just as I close this section off, is that nobody is going to do that for you. Nobody is going to say, here, this is what you should prioritize for your ibadah. So there's no point in Ramadan if we're feeling resentful, we're feeling burnt out, we're very angry that we have to do all of these things. And we know that our actions are judged by our intention. So if we are feeling like, I don't even want to do this and nobody is listening to me, sometimes this is where the boundaries come in, where you respectfully have conversations with your children, with your husband, with the wider family. You may not even have a conversation, because I know culturally that's a bit difficult, but you may simply just say to yourself, this Ramadan, I am going to have this boundary, which means I'm going to spend 20 minutes, half an hour every single day before Maghrib, and I am going to sit and make dua. I'm going to talk to Allah, or I'm going to read my Quran. Those are the two things that I would say just off the top of my head.
Jazakallah, Maryam, for that insightful view. I'm thinking about kind of the 3 points that you raised there, and already if we're focusing on those points, we're reducing guilt, and guilt is quite heavy, isn't it, for Muslim women? What would you say around that?
I would say guilt is absolutely huge, but I think what I would go further and say, and this is what I see in my work, that guilt is not. I think a lot of the guilt that we struggle with, especially as Muslim women, it doesn't come from Islam itself. Sometimes it does, right? But I think most of it is cultural. And I truly believe most of it is cultural. And the reason why I say that is because I speak to a lot of women, and I also struggled with this myself. I remember right at the beginning of my motherhood journey that we have this perception of what a good woman is, or we have this perception of what a good wife is. And those perceptions or those beliefs don't usually come from us. It usually comes from what we saw our mothers doing, our aunties doing, our grandmas doing. And I speak to so many working women who say to me, Maryam, oh my goodness, I feel so guilty that, I couldn't make iftar today. And actually I had to, get a takeaway, or I had to get something catered in. I couldn't do it. And they feel so much guilt for resting, so much guilt for prioritizing themselves. And I would say that's very, very cultural. And yes, managing guilt it's not easy, but I would say it has to be a non-negotiable, because when you reframe prioritizing yourself, especially in Ramadan, remember, the reframe is that you're prioritizing yourself for the sake of Allah, because everything that Allah has given us, like our mind, our mental health, our body, physically, it's all an imana, right? So if it's an amana and if it's a gift from Allah, Allah is going to question us as to how did we take care of ourselves? How did we take care of our physical body? How did we take care of our mental health? And unfortunately, and I'm sure this will land with a lot of people listening, is nobody's going to come and do that for you. So I know a lot of us as women, we expect people to read our minds, and I am so guilty of being that person as well. But unfortunately, as much as, your husband loves you, kids love you, your parents love you, nobody can actually do that thing for you. So anytime that guilt creeps up, I would really invite you to think about what is the guilt? Like what is it that I'm feeling guilty about? And B, where does it come from? Because that guilt might not be yours. It might just be cultural expectations and pressures that are on you from other people or what you have seen.
Yeah. I'm just thinking there about kind of what you've said around guilt and how it might be coming from someone else. And we'll come back to that. But I was just thinking about an example that just earlier today at Jummah Salah, I spoke to some sisters about some of the Ramadan journey sessions that we have on at the masjid, and would they like to join? And straight away it was kind of like eyes lighting up, and people want to learn and they want to grow in Deen, and they want to be that role model for their daughters, and they want their daughters to attend. But then there's a second kind of hesitation around, well, I'll have to think about cooking and etc. So I think I like the idea of delegating and putting some time forward for yourself, for your children, and to try and grow in terms of deenful growth, inshallah. I want to think about what you said there, that sometimes the pressures might be coming from other people. Culturally, what kind of pressures do you think that some women might be having? I mean, for some people, there's kind of consequences, isn't there, for putting themselves first? How do people find their way around that, do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that point up. I think the cultural, let's say, expectations that are particularly on women, and they are expected to, unfortunately, lay out a 3-course meal every single day of Ramadan, and having cooked certain dishes. There's many cultural expectations, but they have to be the one who's doing. So it's them extracting their time, them extracting their energy, etc., or whatever you want to call it. And it does come from other places. So it may even be from your husband. It may even be, from your in-laws. It may even be from your auntie, your parents. It can be from the whole world. It may even be your kids, right? And the way to navigate that is something that I teach and I speak about all the time, is that you cannot change anyone. And what I mean by that is you cannot change anyone if they do not have the will to change themselves. So we cannot control anyone on this God's green earth apart from ourselves. So I know that a lot of the time when I speak about these things, I get a lot of women saying to me, but Maryam, my husband doesn't agree, or my in-laws or my parents, they don't agree. And I say this with so much love, as difficult as it is to navigate this. And yes, there are consequences. And let's talk about what the consequences are. The consequences are usually that you're labeled as problematic, disrespectful, maybe you're even talked about, behind your back, or maybe even comments and remarks are made to you, which are very horrible and not very nice. And something that I say, and as you know, I talk a lot about breaking generational cycles. One of the things about breaking generational cycles are breaking these cultural taboos, that it's always the woman that has to do absolutely everything. And I know that in this day and age, there are a lot of women who are, standing up and who are saying, setting boundaries for themselves and prioritizing them for themselves. Because truly, and I think this will resonate with a lot of people listening, and I know that for me, once this clicked to me, I truly understood that so much of what is expected of women is cultural as opposed to what is from Islam. Now, that doesn't mean that if you want to serve your family, absolutely do so. It doesn't mean that you should stop cooking. It doesn't mean that you should stop doing things around your house. Obviously, those things need to be done. But it just means, and this is what I say to my girls all the time. So for everyone listening, I've got 2 older girls who are at those teenage ages, and I've got a 5-year-old, so a mix. And something that I say to my kids all the time is we all live together in this house. Therefore, we are all a family. So everybody has to take responsibility and, do what they can in ability to their age or in ability to what needs to happen around the house. And I think if we start shifting our homes like this, as opposed to burdening it on one person, I think our homes, or I'm not even going to say, I know that our homes will be healthier, happier, and will just be a loving environment to be in, as opposed to just miserable for women, as opposed to burnt out for women, as opposed to just stressed out all the time as mums. And I know that every single mum who's listening, I know that you don't want to be that type of mum. I know that I don't want to be that type of mum. So in order to do that, we have to do something different.
Yes, and that doing something different is always about taking the first step sometimes, which is quite hard for a lot of women who have seen their mothers perhaps sacrificing, and I know we'll go on to talk about that in the second half of the show. But for a lot of people, taking that first step of putting their ibadah first and being that role model is quite difficult. You've talked about kind of having conversations or perhaps thinking about making a personal intention. Can you tell us more about that, personal intentions?
Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking specifically about Ramadan, something that I do personally just before Ramadan starts is I, have a little notebook, just sit down with myself, have some reflection time, even if it's just half an hour, and just really think about who do I want to be this Ramadan? So not necessarily what do I want to do, but who do I want to be? Who do I want to show up as? And once I get down to, well, who do I want to be? Then what does that person, that type of woman, right? What are her daily habits? What is she doing every day? And what is she not doing? And I think that's really important because we always think about what is she doing, but sometimes it's more so about what isn't she doing? And I think I shared a content piece most recently that landed with a lot of people on social media. And that was that maybe this Ramadan isn't about making goals and lists and to-do lists and meal plans. Maybe it isn't about that. But maybe for you, this Ramadan is about thinking about some boundaries, right? So when we think about intentions, it's what do I intend for this Ramadan, right? Outside of this, so let me give you an example. So for those who are listening, and let's say, for example, you struggle to pray on time, maybe this Ramadan, your goal or one of your intentions is to pray as soon as the Salah comes in. Okay. And secondly, let's say you're not regularly praying the Sunnah, for example. Let's say, for example, one of your goals for this Ramadan might be to start praying the Sunnah prayer of most of the prayers, for example. Maybe if you're not having enough time to open and read the Quran, maybe one of your goals is to read, one page every single day or half a page every single day. So it's really about who do you want to be this Ramadan? Because the whole point of Ramadan, I'm sure all of you will agree who are listening, the whole point of Ramadan is to carry forward whatever it is that you emulate within Ramadan. It's not just we do it in Ramadan and that's it, finished, right? So whatever the habits are, whatever the practices are that we are doing in Ramadan, we want to carry them forward. So who do you want to be this Ramadan?
Jazakallah khair, Maryam. We're nearing the end of our first half of the session and the talk, and I'm hoping that we can pick up on some of these points on the other side. And in particular, we're going to think about kind of parenting styles and being that role model and who you want to be individually. I think what you've shared so far is really helpful in terms of delegating and focusing on your ibadah and making that intention and creating those boundaries. Alhamdulillah. You're listening to Iman 1. Maryam and I will see you on the other side. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. You're listening to Iman 1 live on DAB radio. Jazakallah for joining us. And we have with us our guest, Maryam, who before the advert break was talking about parenting and boundaries in Ramadan. Welcome back, Maryam. Just wanted to build on from what you were saying there and thinking a little bit about mental health and emotional well-being and reducing that stress. Sometimes it's important to kind of recognize your parenting style and how that has an impact perhaps on how you're feeling, on how others are feeling. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's one of the one of the main reasons why I started off the work that I do at Black and Brown Parenting. So, just to put it really simply, whenever I speak at events or if I'm on a podcast, the one question I always ask people is give me 3 words to describe growing up in a Black or brown household. And that's always the question that I start off my speaking with. And unfortunately, I have to say that 97% of the time, the words that I use are always very, very heavy and very, very negative. So the words that I tend to get are, it's oppressive, controlling, strict. I had no voice. I had to live a double life. Like this, there's so many examples, unfortunately. And on the other hand, there were also answers that said, responsibility, sibling relationships, loving, and beautiful, beautiful words. Allahumma barik. But unfortunately, like I said, 97% of the time, the words are very negative. And if I just kind of broadly speak about the parenting styles that are very, very typical for Black and brown households, and again, I centering the particular communities that I work with, they are unfortunately very harsh. The discipline is very harsh. There's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of comparison, there's a lot of, even till this day, I know that a lot of us probably grew up like this, being hit, lots of raging, lots of just not a very nice environment to grow up in, unfortunately. Now, again, before I start talking about this, I really always give this disclaimer again. Sorry. The disclaimer is that all of our parents, may Allah bless all of our parents. I mean, and may Allah reward them for doing the best that they could, because for them, they carried a lot of generational trauma. For them, they carried so much hurt and so much pain. And there is a reason why that our parents parented the way that they did. Now, my work focuses a lot about the impact of colonization. I won't go into it today, but there is a reason why the parenting styles in a lot of our homes are very harsh, are very, I don't like to use the word strict because strict can have different definitions, but just very, very, very harsh and violent, unfortunately. And naturally, that has an impact on children. Naturally, that has an impact on the environment in our homes. Now, I just want to take this conversation to something that I'm seeing a lot in Black and brown homes, Muslim homes, you could say, is that there are 2 things that are happening. So we have parents who are doing exactly the same thing that their parents did. So very, very harsh discipline, very, comparison, strictness, just not loving, unfortunately. And then the other side of things, we have parents who have the best intentions, but unfortunately are going the opposite way. Now, what I mean by the opposite way, it's having no boundaries with the kids, letting them do whatever they want, letting them speak in whatever manner they want. And unfortunately, what we don't want in our homes is we don't want the polar opposite, nor do we want to repeat the mistakes of our parents. But what we want to try and do, inshallah, is find the middle ground. Now, I teach something called conscious parenting. So I don't teach gentle parenting, and that's a long conversation for another day, but I teach conscious parenting. Now, what that is I always say that the principles of conscious parenting are from the Sunnah. Okay, because if you look at the seerah and if you look how beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you look at the way that he treated children around him. There are so many examples. He was so merciful. There was so much rahmah in the way that children were treated around him. Those principles are the exact principles that we should be applying in our homes. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. So we should have open communication as our children are growing older. We should speak to them respectfully as much as they should speak respectfully to us as well. We should be open to understanding. We shouldn't be criticizing and comparing them to anyone because they are their own individuals. They are their own human beings with their own likes and dislikes. And sometimes they may choose, let's say a subject at university that we don't agree with, or a subject at school that we don't agree with, or, a path in life that they take that we may not necessarily agree with because maybe it wasn't our expectation for them, but they are their own individual human beings. Just to end off this little section here, I just quickly want to say that something that Allah will ask each and every one of us as parents is the method that we use for their tarbiyah. So tarbiyah, obviously the raising of them. What method did we use? Allah will not ask us about who they became, because who they become when they're adults is not always in our hands, right? If there is a certain test written for them, it is written no matter what we do. We could do our absolute best and they could, inshallah, it doesn't happen to any of our kids, but they could go through a particular test that isn't our fault. But Allah will ask us about the method and the tools that we use to bring them up. Was it loving? Was it, open communication? Was it respectful? Was it, of course, you need to have boundaries with your children. That's something that I'm very, very passionate about. You need to have boundaries with your children because that's part of you guiding them. So just to end off this section, we want to find a middle ground, inshallah, which is absolutely from Islam to raise our kids.
Mm-hmm. And that middle ground for a lot of parents, and you've talked there about kind of the cultural differences that South Asian or other parents, people who've emigrated to the UK might experience, and that difficulty of being brought up with the harshness of the countries that they probably originate from or have immigrated from. How do they find that middle ground? And it's going to be quite difficult, isn't it, really, when you've been brought up with that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I teach, and I speak about this a lot as well, but I do teach it inside my mentorships, is if I have grown up in a very, harsh way, how do I not repeat that particular cycle? And the one thing that I always say is just to start questioning. Simply just start questioning, why do I discipline my kids in this particular way? Why is it that when they do this particular thing, it really frustrates me and really triggers me? Why does that drive me up the wall so much? Because what I noticed in my journey and when I speak to women is that actually what you're getting annoyed by is not what your child is doing. It's not what your teenager is actually saying. It's actually something within yourself. So let me give you an example. So for those of us who grew up not being able to, disagree with our parents, the minute your teenager or the minute your 7 or 8-year-old tells you that you are wrong, or the minute they disagree with you, you are going to feel very frustrated and triggered. But it's not because of that child, but it's because you were never allowed to do that growing up. So this is something that I teach inside my mentorship. So question everything. Why do I discipline like this? Why am I behaving this way? Why am I reacting this way? Why did I just say no to that thing? Because I'm very guilty of this as well. I'm not perfect. Sometimes my kids will ask me something and I'll just say no. And then I step back and I take a pause and I'm like, why did I just say no to that thing? I don't even know why I said no, right? The reflection is really important.
Mm-hmm. And that moment of reflection, sometimes taking that time out of that storm, it can be quite difficult, can't it?
Absolutely. It can be very difficult. And I think it's because a lot of us grew up with this belief that as parents, you can do no wrong. And I know that for the women that I speak to, it's, as a parent, you are always right. So sometimes even looking at the beliefs that you're holding on to, are they actually yours or is it something that you just inherited? But taking that pause is very difficult in the beginning, but the more you practice it, inshallah, the easier it becomes. You can take a pause. In that moment, you can do some dhikr in your head. You can go run and get a glass of water, obviously, maybe not during Ramadan, but you can take a deep breath, whatever it is that you need to bring yourself back to what's going on in front of you, and just reminding yourself that this little person or this big person in front of me is my child. And whilst what they have said is really annoying or is really frustrating me, I'm the adult. I have to be the anchor within this storm and manage the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And being the anchor and managing the situation is paramount. At the same time, it's that feeling of safety for the child.
Absolutely. And I think if there's one thing that we need to create in our homes, it's emotional safety. And I always say that, subhanAllah, emotional safety in our homes is the number one thing that is going to allow our children to be strong believers. Because emotional safety is connected to the self-trust you have within yourself, your self-confidence, your self-esteem. So if we are breaking our children within our homes, much of it is unknowingly, right? Much of it is unknowingly, because I don't want anyone to listen to this and feel really guilty and start shaming themselves, because a lot of that also comes from the waswasa of shaitan, who wants us to stay where we are and not progress. But emotional safety is so important because we know how disgusting and dangerous the world is outside now, the things that our children are being exposed to. So if they don't have emotional safety in the home, they will look for emotional safety outside. And that could be anyone or anything. So it is so important that we try our best. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be days that we slip up. There are going to be days where we shout. Like Allah does not ask for perfection, but it's just learning. So if you don't know how to create emotional safety, learn how to do that. If you don't know how to respond without shouting, learn how to do that. If you think that there's certain things within your upbringing that are still hurting you, you can also learn how to unpack those things as well. And I encourage every single parent out there to really start to question those things within themselves.
And it is that, isn't it? It's that kind of fear of becoming like your parents for those who've experienced harshness growing up, and as a result, like you said earlier, it's important to kind of reduce that guilt and shame, because there is increased anxiety for women, and there is an increased burden, whether working or high achieving or within the home. It's difficult enough as it is, and putting pressures on there, which are significant in comparison to what their parents put on themselves. So taking that time to kind of reflect of who am I as a parent is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What kind of parent do I want to be? What do I want my children to remember? And that's something that I've really been thinking about this Ramadan. When I look back, and when I think about Ramadan when I was growing up, I remember my mom used to read a lot more Quran, and we would go to the masjid together, and it would just be such a beautiful time. Allahumma barik. It wasn't perfect, but it was a really beautiful time. So if there's a question that every single parent, not just mothers, but I know that maybe majority mothers or women listening to this, I want you to ask yourself is, what kind of mother do I want to show up this Ramadan? Or what kind of woman do I want to show up as this Ramadan? What do I want my kids to remember? And just a little short disclaimer here. I know that unfortunately, and again, this is another cycle that we need to break in our homes. Unfortunately, a lot of the pressure of parenting is always on the woman. And we know from an Islamic perspective, tarbiyah of the child is both father and mother. It's both father and mother. But unfortunately, culturally, it's very accepted that the father goes out to work, puts food on the table, and that's his job finished. And obviously, we know from Islam that is not true as well. So, for those of you who are in this space, what I would say is a beautiful conversation that you can have with your husband, obviously, whenever you're ready, is, do you know, what do we want our kids, what values do we want to pass on to our kids? What are the specific values we want to pass on to them? And how are we going to do that? Because we can say we want our children to be truthful, right? But what does that look like in our homes? Are we telling the truth, right? Or how do we uphold the truth in our relationships? So we want honesty, or we want, we want Islam to be the core, or we want, emotional safety to be the core. How do we create that in our home? Because the chances are your husband wants exactly the same thing for your children as you do. You may have different parenting styles, but how do you work together to get to those values that you both want to pass on to your children?
Mm-hmm. And I think a part of that is how an individual or a parent tolerates discomfort. And if they're living in extended families, they'll be seeing different layers of that, won't they, in terms of demonstrations of tolerating discomfort, or the response with harshness, or more recently you'll see it perhaps widely when perhaps at the madrasas, perhaps with parents in the community, etc., or within your own homes, where hitting, smacking has probably been replaced with shouting very loudly. And people forget that it's kind of creates the same kind of anxiety and discomfort for children and others in the household. How do we think about tolerating discomfort? How do parents demonstrate that, perhaps with each other and in front of their children? And how can we kind of speak to extended family members about kind of our boundaries and our parenting styles?
Okay, I absolutely love that you asked that question. So one of the other things that I teach inside my mentorship is how to set boundaries that are culturally informed. Because I know that in a lot of the white-centered non-Muslim spaces, boundaries are have a conversation, confront everyone, have a fight with everyone. Obviously, culturally, we cannot do that. Culturally, we don't want to be doing that, right? So let's go to what you said about discomfort. Now, when I think about discomfort, one of the things that I invite every single person to think about is discomfort doesn't mean that you are doing something wrong. Okay, I'll say that again. Discomfort doesn't necessarily mean that you are doing something wrong. It just means that you are doing something new. And when you are doing something new, it is uncomfortable because your brain doesn't recognize it as familiar, which is why I always say that sometimes it's easy to do the familiar thing, like shouting and raging. It's easy to do that, and it's more difficult to take the pause. It's more difficult to speak respectfully to your children or to everybody around you. And that's because it's not familiar to your brain. So this is, if you want to plaster this like on your forehead, discomfort doesn't mean that you are doing something wrong. It just means you are doing something new. Now, I want to take the conversation to what you said about, because I think it's really, really important. What you said about, if you're navigating in-laws, you're navigating your black or brown parents, you're navigating, the cultural kind of wider expectations of you. What I'm going to say is some of you may be able to have a conversation, right? But most of us, I'm going to say, cannot. We cannot go and open up a can of worms and have a conversation because most of the elders do not want to have that conversation. They will see it as disrespectful. Okay. So what I teach, and again, this is the culturally informed boundary, where it can be something simple as, let's say you're going for iftar, have a conversation with your husband or, if whoever you live with in your home, and you say, we're going for iftar. What time maximum are we going to leave? Because we know the kids are going to get really tired. They're going to play up. And both of us know that by this time we have to leave and we have to go home, for example. Or for example, if someone has asked you to do something in your family and, you're really stressed out, you're burnt out, you've had a really hard day, you've had a really hard week. And as much as you would love to help them out, your boundary for yourself is, I can't come today. Maybe I'll come on the weekend, or maybe I'll come next week, this particular day. So your boundary doesn't always have to be verbally communicated. It may be a behavioral boundary, which is usually what it works culturally. But I'm going to say that also, and I always make these very bold statements, but I think it's really important that we understand, particularly as women who are trying to break cycles, is that unfortunately someone somewhere is going to think that you are a bad wife.
Mhm.
Someone somewhere is going to think that you're a bad mom. They're going to think that you're a bad woman or whatever it is. And it doesn't mean that you are. It just means you are doing things differently that they didn't have the safety to do. That doesn't mean that it's your truth. So yes, discomfort is because you are doing something new.
And there's that, again, that kind of psychological growth in parenting and differences in generations and generations to come. Maryam, I think there you've shared something around that growing up with unpredictability and the impact that can have on children and the environment, but at the same time, how you do that respectfully,
Mm.
and perhaps asking, like I think you mentioned there, around your husband speaking to his parents, perhaps, or if not having that conversation, then you agreeing. Like you said, the example of going away out for an iftar and how you agree on leaving and the time of leaving. Um, I mean, I don't think you said specifically speaking to parents, but would you say that would be an option for the husband if you're living with in-laws or with extended family?
Yeah, so in my work, I come across this quite a lot, and I think unfortunately, the cultural kind of narrative is that the daughter-in-law, as much as she might be loved, or hopefully she is loved, she is unfortunately an outsider, and that's generally how she's seen. So it works better if, let's say, for example, the husband can have a private conversation with the parents or with the family members, because when the daughter-in-law kind of gets in the middle of things, that's when sometimes a lot of chaos can start. So if respectfully a conversation can be had by the husband, that would be absolutely amazing. Doesn't mean, and I think what's important here is it doesn't mean that they will agree with it, and that's okay because they might not understand it, and that's okay. It might make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it just means that you can just still live rooted in, whatever boundaries and values that you've created for yourself.
And that sounds perfect in terms of the husband and wife creating their boundaries and having an understanding between themselves and continuing as they want to in terms of providing that emotional safety and boundaries for their children. Um, we're talking particularly about sisters and guilt in particular. I know that we're saying that husbands have a big role to play in a lot of the parenting, but we're talking specifically about sisters, women not finding the time to rest or look after themselves and self-care. Again, that's something that was sacrificed by elders. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think martyrdom And self-sacrifice is just the foundation, or is given to us as the foundation of what being a mother is. And just for everybody that's listening, and one of the ways of breaking cycles is by not repeating that narrative or not repeating that cycle in your home. And one of the things that I say to women is know who you are, or start to begin to know who you are outside of your roles. So who are you outside of being a wife? Who are you outside of being a mum? Who are you outside of being, a daughter, a cousin, whatever, all of the roles that we play. I know we play lots of roles. Who are you? I know that's a very heavy and a big question, but that's where a lot of the journey starts. Even for myself, that's where my journey started of, well, how do I show up as a whole woman as opposed to just a mom or just a wife and there's nothing wrong. Like those roles, Allahumma barik, are so incredibly important, especially the one of being a mom. But one of the things that I learned, and I really want to share this, is that because what we don't understand is that the way that we show up in our homes or in our workplaces or in our communities, it's not just about us. For those of us who are mothers, we know that our children are watching us every single day, and they learn more from what we do than what we say. Because we can teach them, but we might be doing the complete opposite. And one of the things that I made a decision for myself is that I am not going to show up as a miserable, stressed out, burnt out mother, because I don't want that for my kids. I don't want to normalize that for my children and for them to think that's what motherhood is, or for them to think that's what a woman is supposed to do. Because when your children grow up, they will, first of all, they will repeat what they saw you do. And I don't want that for my kids. And for those of you who have boys, I know I only have girls, but also for those of you who have boys, what we need to understand is that when they grow up, and inshallah, when they get married, they are going to expect the same of their wives. When they have children, the mother of their children, they're going to expect the same of, their wife who is raising their children. So what you do in your home isn't just about you, it's about generations. And that's how important you are, and that's how powerful you are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And it's important that this resting during Ramadan and that boundary of finding rest is had. I'm thinking about some of the tips that you've shared on your social media, that chai, having time in the evening where you can have chai without a phone. And I like some of your practical tips. Have you got any more that you want to share?
Yeah. So first of all, I think we need to understand that rest is also ibadah, because it's part of looking after yourself, and that you can't pour from an empty cup. But just to give you just a few tips, if you're coming home from work or if you're on your lunch break, what are you doing during that time that's actually nourishing you? And I know a lot of us grab our phones and we start scrolling, but that actually might not be helping you at all. Sometimes it might be, leaving the office and going to sit in a, if you've got like a nearby park or a bench or something, and just looking around and, like admiring the creation of Allah, for example, or, if you've got your dhikr counter with you, doing some dhikr after iftar, making sure that you take out 15 minutes for yourself. Having a cup of tea or whatever it is.
Yeah, jazakallah for that. And I know that people can find more information on your social media. So would you like to share with us some of the work that you do? You've mentioned conscious parenting, and I think that's very relevant to the work, to the conversation we've had today. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself and how people can find you?
Yeah, so you can find me across all social media platforms, but I'm mainly on Instagram, and that's at Black and Brown Parenting. If you type that in, all of my socials will come up, inshallah. And if anything that I've said resonates with you, so I have two mentorships. One of them is a parenting mentorship that I run to really help you to break those toxic parenting cycles that I've spoken about. And the second mentorship is about healing. So healing from your upbringing, and raising yourself and learning how to set those boundaries, inshallah.
Sounds very interesting, and the work that you do is amazing. We're feeling very honoured to have you on the show today. Jazakallah khair for your time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me, and Ramadan Mubarak to everybody again. Please keep me in your dua if you have benefited from anything that I've said. And if you connect with me on social media, just say that you heard me on the radio. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you, inshallah. Thank you again.
That's fantastic. It's been great timing for Maryam to be on the show, creating those Ramadan boundaries. We are well early into Ramadan, and we can hope to continue some of the tips that she's provided with the support of our husbands and extended families. You're listening to Atiyah Ali on Ramadan Radio, and now called Iman 1 on DAB radio. You can find the recording of this episode on Ramadan Radio Wolves, which will shortly be turned into Iman 1. So keep a lookout for that. Jazakallah khair for joining us. You'll hear me every Saturday at 1 o'clock. Assalamu alaikum.